The nurses and the doctors are like, what is going on? We thought you'd be in labor by now. I was like, yeah, I thought so too. I have to be right on the verge of going into labor. I'm walking around at 4 centimeters dilated. My body is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. My epidural, for the 3rd time, began to wear off on my right side. You can't have any more epidural. I'm at my breaking point. I cannot do this anymore. With each contraction, her heart rate would decrease pretty dramatically, and the room was dead silent. And I remember thinking, this is it. I'm gonna have to have an emergency C-section. I was actively hemorrhaging. Tell me what's going on. Am I okay? Like, am I gonna die? Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here and this is the first video that you're watching of mine, hi, I'm so glad to have you. Today I'm going to be recounting my long-awaited birth story. My daughter is almost a year old now, and I'm just now sitting down to make this video, mostly because my daughter is a terrible sleeper. Every nap that she takes is a contact nap, and so I'm never away from her long enough to film anything like this. But today she is at her grandparents' house and I have the house all to myself, so I thought I'd take this opportunity to finally sit down and film this for you guys. It's a long story, so you might want to buckle in, grab yourself a drink, a little snack, get comfortable. Also, I do want to go ahead and give kind of a content warning for this. It's going to be a little bit gruesome. I'm not going to go too into detail, but I am going to give you context to the story. Obviously, I'm going to be talking about birth, labor and delivery, the appointments leading up to my labor and delivery, things like that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the days and weeks leading up to that because I feel like it does give a lot of context to the story. So for the months leading up to my labor and delivery, my OB and I had talked about the plan going into labor and delivery, if I wanted to be induced, if I wanted to wait and see if I wanted to labor on my own, things like that. And my entire thought process was that I wanted to give my body the opportunity to go into labor on its own. I really didn't want to be induced, but I wasn't necessarily against it if it came to the point where I needed to be induced for my safety or the baby's safety. So my OB and I agreed that we would give it until 41 weeks, and if I got to the 41 week mark, I would be induced. I did have a couple of high risk factors. So Elora is our rainbow baby, so that means a baby after a loss. So I had had a miscarriage 4 months before I got pregnant with Elora. So because of that and my BMI and the fact that it was going to be my first delivery, I did have a couple of those high risk factors, and so I was placed on baby aspirin. And from 33 weeks on, I actually had weekly ultrasounds, and they measured the fluid and her movements and if she was taking practice breaths. So I was going to the doctor weekly from 33 weeks on. So they were closely monitoring with ultrasound my condition, the baby's condition, and we were keeping tabs on how everything was going. And we were kind of adjusting that plan accordingly when we got closer and closer to delivery. So at my 36-week appointment, my husband and my OB and I agreed that we were going to tentatively set an induction date for 41 weeks, and that would have been September 18th. So I did have a tentative induction date for September 18th, just in case I didn't go into labor on my own. But we honestly didn't think that I would have to go to 41 weeks. Pretty much everyone in my family and Elijah's family has given birth either before their due date or just shortly after. So I really didn't have much of a fear that I would need to be induced at that time. And even if I did, I knew that by 41 weeks I probably would just want to be induced regardless. So that was okay with me. And if I did go to 41 weeks, then I would have to go in at midnight on September 18th for my induction. Before that time, I was trying everything at home to naturally encourage labor along. I was eating dates, I was going on walks, I was drinking raspberry tea, I was bouncing on my birth ball. I was doing all of the things that I could possibly do home alone, with the exception of the midwife's brew, because I know that that's dangerous and a lot of OBs recommend against that. So that was the one thing I wasn't willing to do. But by about 38 weeks, almost on the dot, I noticed that Elora had dropped quite significantly and I was feeling a lot of pelvic pressure. I was actually at my parents' house visiting them when I dropped all of a sudden. Between the time that I arrived and the time that I left, I was significantly lower. And I remember my brother taking a picture of me because he was like, that is crazy. He's like, I think you'll want to remember that because it happened so fast out of nowhere. And so that night we actually decided to film the videos that we posted to my channel and the main channel about what to expect during my maternity leave. So actually the next day I came up to the house and filmed that, and then I came back home and filmed mine because we were so afraid that because I dropped so quickly and I was having a lot of pelvic pressure that I was going to go into labor any day, and we were kind of just on baby watch at that point. In the days leading up to my 39-week appointment, I was having some kind of inconsistent Braxton Hicks contractions. They weren't super painful, but they were definitely noticeable. And so I ended up bouncing on my labor ball for a little while. And the day before my 39-week appointment, I actually lost 2 big chunks of my mucus plug, like within a 3-hour time span. And then my 39-week appointment was the next day. So that would have been September 7th. Now, keep in mind, while all of this was happening, I was still dealing with the situation with my car, my CX-5 that was totaled in my driveway after a storm. So a storm had actually knocked a great big tree over onto my car and totaled it in my own driveway. And I think I was around 35 and a half weeks pregnant when that happened. My car was in the shop and I was driving a rental car. We still did not really know when we were going to get the insurance payout and be able to go and buy a new car. And the rental was actually almost up at this time. So we were really on a time crunch. And with my contractions and Alora dropping, we were really afraid that I was going to be without a car with a newborn. So we were really freaking out. So at my 39-week appointment, we go up there, we have the baby bag. I decide that we're going to do a cervical check on that appointment date, and we were going to go ahead and do a membrane sweep. So if you don't know what a membrane sweep is, it's going to be a little graphic, but the OB will kind of go through your cervix and kind of sweep with her finger the membrane and the amniotic sac away from the cervix and uterus to try to like encourage labor along. And because I had been having some inconsistent contractions and back pain, I've been bouncing on my ball and stuff. Whenever she checked me during that exam, I actually was already 2.5 centimeters dilated. So she went ahead and did the membrane sweep, which was very uncomfortable. After the membrane sweep, she actually had told me that she had actually stretched my cervix out to a 3. So when I left that appointment, I was 3 centimeters dilated and 50% effaced. Being that I was actually so much further dilated than I was thinking that I was at the time, we were almost sure that I would go into labor any moment, and I was definitely not going to make it to my 40-week appointment. We kind of panicked a little bit. So we decided that while we were in Knoxville, we were going to go ahead and go up to the insurance branch location that they had in Knoxville, and we were going to fill out the paperwork that was necessary for them to transfer the insurance money over to my bank account so that I could pay off my previous car loan. And we were going to really try to push this along to try to get me into a new car, because I was honestly really terrified being that far along and just having had a membrane sweep that I was going to go into labor. I was having some pretty painful contractions, but they weren't consistent. And so we decided that we were going to go up there, fill out the paperwork, and just see if we could get this process moving along. So while we were up there, the insurance person had told us that it would honestly take maybe like 30 minutes to an hour to have the money transferred over to pay off my previous car loan. And then we were going to use the buffer to put another down payment on my car that I have now. So we were like, okay, great. 30 minutes is fantastic. We're already in Knoxville. Let's just go over to the Mazda dealership and let's see if they can work out something with us and see if we could buy a car today. We got the money transferred over, and we had called the car salesman that we had gone through the previous sale with, and he let us know that he was off work that day, but he was willing to come in and help us through the buying process and get everything situated with the paperwork, being that I was honestly afraid that I could go into labor and have a baby any day. But he couldn't go into work for a couple hours, so we decided that we were going to walk around Knoxville a little bit, try to see if my contractions would progress any, and we were going to get lunch and then head over to the Mazda dealership and see if we could get things sorted out. We actually decided in that 3 hours to go to Costco or Sam's Club. I forget which one is actually there in Knoxville. We decided to go up there and just do a little bit of shopping. And I remember being in so much pain at this point, like just the pressure in my pelvis and having inconsistent contractions and having just had the procedure done. I actually brought my belly band, and I was wearing my belly band around Costco and like waddling around. After we got done walking around a little bit, the contractions kind of let up and I wasn't really in that much pain anymore aside from the pelvic pressure. So we decided to sit down and have some lunch, and then after we had lunch we decided to go over to the Mazda dealership, and I actually bought my car that day, September 7th, the day of my 39-week appointment, because I was so scared that I was going to go into labor that night. On the drive from Knoxville to my parents' house, I was having pretty consistent contractions every like 5 to 8 minutes, and it was making it a little bit difficult to drive. And I remember thinking like, okay, when I get to my parents' house, I don't know what's gonna happen. I don't know if I'm gonna have to turn around and go right back to Knoxville and have a baby, or if my contractions are gonna fizzle out, or what's gonna happen. As soon as I pulled in the driveway and got out, the contractions stopped. At that point, we were kind of just waiting. We didn't really know what was gonna happen. We were really just on baby watch, and we were kind of all like tentatively on the edge of our seats, just like waiting for something to happen. Nothing happened. My due date actually was September 11th. The next day was September 8th, and my contractions had completely fizzled out. The doctor did advise us that if the membrane sweep was gonna work and put me into labor, it would happen within 24 to 48 hours. So I knew I had a couple days to kind of feel things out and see if the membrane sweep was gonna work for me. It didn't. So by September 11th, my due date, nothing was happening. I wasn't feeling anything aside from a lot of pelvic pressure, inconsistent contractions. I honestly was kind of bummed because nothing was happening. It seemed like the membrane sweep did not work. It did not put me into labor. I was still doing all of the things. I was still eating dates. I was still drinking raspberry tea, walking, bouncing on my labor ball. Nothing was happening. My next appointment for my 40-week appointment was actually September 13th. So that would have been, I would have been 40 weeks and 2 days at that point. And we were really thinking that I wasn't going to make it to that appointment just based on how dilated I was and the contractions that I was having in the car and things like that. But I did. I actually did make it to that appointment. Everybody was calling me. They were asking me like, what's going on? Do you feel anything? Are we having a baby? Where's the baby? I'm like, your guess is as good as mine. I have no idea. I'm not in labor. I don't feel anything. We were actually kind of disappointed until midnight. Midnight comes around. It's September 12th, so I'm 40 weeks one day. My 40-week appointment was the next day, but it was midnight. It was in the middle of the night, and I kind of felt a trickle. So I had just gotten out of the shower, and I sat down in bed, and I kind of felt a little bit of wetness, and I'm like, what is going on? Was that my water breaking? Or because I was having a little bit of like light contractions, mostly just Braxton Hicks. It wasn't anything like too crazy, wasn't too intense. I could talk through them, everything was fine. I was kind of just like occasionally timing them and seeing if they were getting closer together, which they weren't. They kind of spaced out after I had taken a shower that night. So we're all kind of just waiting to see what's gonna happen. I sit down and I'm like, oh, I think my water just broke. And Elijah's like, what are you talking about? So he goes over, and there is a small spot on the bed of like where I had trickled. And so I was like, I don't know. I honestly can't tell. I can't tell if I'm still leaking, or if that was my water, or if I'm just like wet from the shower still. Like, I don't know what it is. So we ended up calling the nurses line. Our hospital was an hour away. So we called the nurses line, and we're like, hey, we're not really sure if my water just broke. I'm 40 weeks in one day. I just felt a trickle, but I can't tell if anything else is happening. I'm not really sure if it was my water. So they're like, okay, just to be safe, get to the hospital within the next hour, and we'll check and see if it was amniotic fluid or not. So our hospital was an hour away, so we decided, okay, we have to leave right now. We left for Knoxville at like, I want to say 12:30, 12:45. We get there. It's like 1:30, 1:45. They admit me, they do some blood work, they put me on the monitor, they check me for amniotic fluid. Nada. My water did not break. They sent me home. So now we have to make the unfortunate drive all the way from Knoxville back home at like 3 o'clock in the morning. Elijah's kind of tentatively like, he's working up until I go into labor. So he is like on the phone with his boss, like, hey, sorry it's super late. We had to go to the hospital. We thought Kendra's water broke. It didn't. I'll be at work tomorrow. September 12th. Wake up the next morning, I don't feel anything, no contractions, just a lot of pelvic pressure, and my appointment was the next day. So now I'm really feeling like, okay, I don't know what's gonna happen. I don't know if I'll go into labor before 41 weeks or if I'm gonna have to be induced. September 13th comes around, the day of my 40-week appointment. We come in, and the nurses and the doctors are like, what is going on? We thought you'd be in labor by now. I was like, yeah, I thought so too. So I go in, and my OB is like, okay, do you want me to do another membrane sweep? Try to maybe encourage things along. Maybe the second one will help you out a little bit more. And I was like, absolutely yes. So they had checked me in labor and delivery the night that I thought my water broke, and I was still 3 centimeters, 50% effaced. Nothing had happened. She checked me again, and I was about 3.5 centimeters, and then she had done another membrane sweep. She said, I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive with this one just to really see if we can really encourage your body to go into labor. That one wasn't as painful as the first one, but it was definitely still really uncomfortable. She told me that I was about a 4 when I left, and I think I was about 60% effaced. At this point, I'm thinking, okay, the first one didn't work, the second one has to work. Like, I have to be right on the verge of going into labor. I'm walking around at 4 centimeters dilated. I'm having inconsistent contractions. I feel like my pelvis is coming apart. Like, I have to be close. We got in the car, and I remember we had to stop for gas, and I remember sitting in the car, and I was just getting hit and hit and hit with the most painful contractions I had experienced thus far. And Elijah is like listening to me work through a contraction while he's pumping gas, and he goes, do we need to turn around? Like, do we need to go back to the hospital? And I'm like, well, let's just wait and see if they become closer together. I think it's the 5-1-1 rule, so like 5 minutes apart, lasting a minute and for an hour. So I wasn't there yet, so we just decided to kind of go home and wait things out, because I had been through this before. I had been through a failed membrane sweep once already. I knew that my contractions would probably just level out and I might just have to be induced. By the time we got home, my contractions had all but gone away. They were really inconsistent, not super painful at that point. I was timing them. My little timing contraction app did tell me to go to the hospital just based on like the light contractions I was having. They were just inconsistent and they weren't lasting a minute. So I knew that I probably wasn't going into labor at that point. I honestly was really upset because I had already had 2 membrane sweeps. I've been doing everything that I possibly could at home to kind of encourage labor along. And at this point, the next day, September 14th, I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna have to be induced. I actually had an appointment on Friday, which would have been the 15th, for pre-induction testing and blood work. So by Thursday, I was like, okay, I'm probably gonna have to be induced. Membrane sweep didn't work. It had only been 24 hours, but I was like, I don't think this worked. I think I'm gonna have to be induced. And I kind of was just accepting my fate at that point. One of my friends that I went to high school actually, or somehow, was pregnant at the same time as me and was actually due on the same day. And she had elected to be induced, I think, at 40 weeks and 2 days. So she's actually in the hospital while we were kind of in that waiting and seeing period, just to kind of see like if this second membrane sweep had worked. She actually messaged me from the hospital and she was like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Are you guys in labor? And I was like, no, we had a second membrane sweep. We're just kind of waiting things out. We're gonna see how things go. We had dinner. Elijah and I is kind of like our last hurrahs, like just us. And I remember being so physically uncomfortable at that restaurant because I could barely walk. My pelvis hurt so bad. I wasn't having consistent contractions, but I was just in a lot of pain and I was really, really, really heavy. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm so jealous. I don't know why I didn't just elect to be induced that night when I went in. I really don't know what's gonna happen. I feel really far overdue and I just feel like ready to have this baby. And I'm just really hoping that within the next day, my membrane sweep is gonna work and I'm just gonna go into labor on my own. I honestly thought that was wishful thinking at that point. I did not think that I was going to go into labor on my own. I had done everything else and it hadn't worked. So I honestly was just kind of accepting my fate at that point. So early in the morning on the 14th, I had gotten up and I had actually lost the rest of my mucus plug. So if there's one thing that the membrane sweep did do, it was encourage my body to lose the mucus plug, and I actually had my bloody show that morning. So it seemed like things were moving along a little bit. I was having a ton of pelvic pressure, no contractions, but it really felt like she was really putting pressure on my cervix, and it seemed like I was dilating a little bit, but I wasn't feeling any contractions. So I really just decided to hammer down on work and see if I could get a couple of videos done before I had to go to the hospital. So I actually spent the entire afternoon working on a video for the other channel. And I remember like about halfway through the video, I remember like this wave of exhaustion hitting me and I was like, oh my gosh, I really, really want to take a nap. And in hindsight, I should have taken the nap, but I didn't. I decided I was going to finish the video and then I was going to go lay down. So I finished the video, uploaded it, and that was actually the last one that I did for the channel before maternity leave. Elijah gets home from work, nothing's going on. We both decided to take a shower and go to bed. So I laid down that night at around, I think, midnight or 12:30. I remember thinking, okay, well, the membrane sweep didn't work. I'm gonna have to be induced. My pre-induction testing was actually scheduled to be the next morning at like 10 o'clock in the morning. So we were like, okay, well, I guess we're gonna go to that appointment and we're gonna get the pre-induction testing going, and I'm just gonna have to be induced on Monday. I remember after I laid down at around 12:30, I remember feeling a more painful contraction. Like, it wasn't Braxton Hicks, like it was a contraction, but it wasn't like so intense that it like knocked the breath out of me or anything. It was noticeable. So I decided to start timing them, and at that point they were about 20 minutes apart, and so I knew that that was pretty inconsistent. I knew that I probably should just get some sleep. So I think I finally went to sleep at like 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And then by 4:30, I was woken up by one of the most painful contractions that I've had. And I remember sitting up in bed and I was like, whoa, where did that come from? So it was so painful and it woke me up from a dead sleep that I knew like I was gonna have to start timing them. At that point, they were about 8 minutes apart and they were pretty strong, like pretty uncomfortable. I couldn't lay back down. I kind of was just sitting up in bed, like waiting to see what was gonna happen. After a little while, they became about 5 minutes apart. And so I decided that I needed to wake Elijah up. So at around 5:15 on the morning of September 15th, I woke Elijah up and I'm like, hey, I really think I'm in labor this time for real. So he's like, oh, okay, are you sure? Like, what's going on? How far apart are the contractions? I said, they're about 7 to 8 minutes apart. They're getting closer to 5 at this point. They're pretty painful. I can't go back to sleep. And they're the most consistent contractions that I've had thus far. So I really think we might need to start getting ready and just kind of prepare for what might happen. I was scheduled for a doctor's appointment that morning at 10. So I knew I was gonna have to be up anyway. But I definitely couldn't sleep with how painful they were. So he said, okay, do I have time to take a shower? And I'm like, yeah. I'm just gonna wait it out for a little while longer. I wouldn't be ready to leave right now anyway. So he decides he's gonna get in the shower. And while he was in the shower, they kind of became closer and closer and closer, slightly more painful. He kind of gathered a few of his things together. He packed a couple of last minute things for his bag. All of the bags were already in the car, but the car seat wasn't yet. So he decided to go ahead and put the car seat in. I'm kind of sitting there and I remember thinking, I don't know when I should call it. Like, I think I'm in labor, I'm having contractions, but I don't know when is it serious enough for me to go to the hospital? Like, this is my first baby, my first labor. I really don't know, like, what is the moment that I really should call it and just get in the car and go? So Elijah is standing in the living room and I'm sitting on the couch and I remember saying, okay, my next contraction is scheduled to hit at 5:55 in the morning. If it hits at 5:55, we need to go. Lo and behold, sure enough, my contraction came at 5:55. They were about 5 minutes apart at that point. I said, okay, we're gonna go, let's get in the car, let's grab some breakfast because I won't be able to eat after I become admitted to the hospital, and let's just see what happens. We walk out, I let my parents know what's going on. They were gonna go and check on the dogs later. We decide to stop by a coffee shop because I knew that was the only place that was gonna be open at 6 o'clock in the morning. As we're driving there, we called the hospital to let them know that we were on our way. And we let them know like the contractions would be consistent since 4:30 this morning. They were 7 to 8 minutes apart, now they're 5. By the time we got in the car, they were closer to 2 to 3 and they were becoming like much more intense. We decided to grab breakfast really quick. So I grabbed breakfast, and the funniest part about this, my contractions were intense, but the time in between them, I was just normal. I would have a contraction and it would be really intense, and then I would just like start scarfing down my breakfast, and Elijah thought it was the funniest thing because I'd go from like intense pain to just like eating. I was like, how serious like is this? Like, what if I get there and they turn me away again and I'm really not in labor? He's like, how can you not be in labor? And I was like, you know what, you're right. So we get to the hospital at around 7 o'clock because it was like an hour drive, so we left right before 6. We get there a little after 7. Elijah dropped me off at the front door and I walked in, and I distinctly have this vivid memory of walking into the hospital. I'm like having consistent contractions every 2 minutes. They're really painful, and all of the staff are also coming in for morning shift. And so I'm walking into the hospital like waddling in between contractions, and there's like a sea of blue scrubs like walking around me, and they're not paying any attention to me whatsoever. They're all just like speeding past me to the front doors, passing me up, going into their morning shift. And I finally get into the building. I start having a contraction and I see like a little waiting area. So I go over there, I sit down on one of the chairs, I'm working through a contraction, and the sweetest old nurse comes up to me and she goes, hey, are you okay? And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm okay. She's like, oh, I thought you were in labor. I was like, oh, I am. I am. I'm just waiting for my husband to park the car. She goes, oh, okay. She's like, do you know where labor and delivery is? And I'm like, yeah, I've been there before. I just want to walk up with him. He's like, oh, okay. She walks away. Elijah finally comes to the door with some of our bags, and we go up to labor and delivery, and I'm contracting every 2 minutes, so it's really hard. It takes me a while to get up there. We get up there, we get checked in. I let them know that I've been in labor since 4:30, really since like 12 or 12:30, but that was kind of like early labor. They're like, okay, we're gonna go ahead and put you in one of the rooms, and we'll give you about an hour to see where you're at, and then we'll check you, and we'll see if the on-call OB would like to admit you. I think I got in there and I got gowned up and dressed by like maybe 7:30 or 7:45. So that is when the timer for the hour started. And I was really already in a lot of pain. And I knew that I was already 4 centimeters dilated, so I knew that this could be a quick process if I were to dilate really fast from here. And so I was a little bit scared that like I would go in and they would have me wait too long and I wouldn't be able to get an epidural, or things would just progress really fast. And they did progress really fast. So by the time that I got settled into the room, my contractions started becoming really, really painful. And I honestly was not in the mental headspace to deal with them. So I had not, unfortunately, taken any birthing classes. I hadn't really like read up on any like birthing techniques or anything like that. I kind of just had gone into it in more of a relaxed state. Everything's gonna be fine. My body knows how to do this. If I think about it too much, it's gonna stress me out. I really would just rather go in there like relaxed. And so that's what I did. But by the point where I'd been there for about 30 minutes, I was like yelling through the contractions. They were so painful. Elijah hadn't read up either, so he didn't know what to do to help me. He was trying to talk to like our family members because everybody was asking for information, like what's going on. He was trying to keep everybody updated. And I was like, I remember being so mad because I'd only had like 2 hours of sleep within the last 2 days and I just wasn't in the headspace to be in labor. And I remember saying, put your freaking phone down and help me because I cannot do this. I can't work through this by myself. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. It hurts really, really, really bad. And I just want them to come in and check me and give me my IV so I can go ahead and get the ball moving for an epidural, because I knew for a fact that I wanted an epidural from the get-go. I couldn't lay down at all. I was standing, but I was hooked up to the monitors and I was in this tiny little, I couldn't move around. I couldn't really move through the contractions. I was really having a hard time coping. And so finally the nurses come in and they're like, okay, we can hear you. It definitely seems like you're in labor. She's like, I know it probably hurts really bad, but don't push. I was like, I'm not pushing. I'm just having a really hard time coping with the pain right now. And I know that if you've watched any of my other videos from like my documentation on like what was going on after delivery and during my appointments, my OB appointments, I'm a really hard stick. And so I knew that it was going to be a really, really long and hard process to get my IV in. And I was really dreading it, trying to go through that with the contractions. I knew it was going to be really difficult. And so I was kind of just like wanting to get that process moving along so that I could get my epidural and like have some sort of pain relief. I hadn't slept. I was like really dehydrated and like it was going to be a long day of laboring, I knew. Finally, they get in there. They're like, okay, we're going to check you. They checked me. I was at about a 5. And so they decided to get with the on-call OB and see if they could admit me. So they left, they came back, they were like, okay, we're gonna go ahead and admit you. I was really, really struggling at this point. And they were like, let's go ahead and do your IV. One of the nurses comes in and she tries 2 different times to get my IV in. She actually tried in my right arm, and I have a picture of what this did to my arm afterwards, and it's pretty gnarly, so I'm gonna warn you before I show the picture of it. But she tried in my arm here, and then she tried in my arm here, and this was the second attempt. And when she did this, it blew my vein so badly that like it was swollen immediately after she did it. And so she had tried twice, and she was like, okay, I'm gonna get the head nurse and she's gonna try to get an IV in on your left arm. And I'm like really struggling at this point. I'm like, please just get my IV in so I can get my epidural and be admitted. I'm really, really, really struggling. Head nurse comes in. She gets my IV in on the first try in this arm here. And I remember sitting there going through a contraction while she was doing it. And after she got it in, I was like, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. At that point, they've got me all hooked up. They got my IV taped down. The on-call OB was ready to admit me. And so they were ready to move me down to a labor and delivery room. And then also I was like, are you guys gonna have to do blood work to get the epidural ready and administered and stuff like that? Because I was kind of anticipating that it was gonna be a while before they could make sure that I was okay to get the epidural. And so I was really dreading that process because it was already like 9 o'clock and I've been laboring for a really long time and they were really intense, and I was just really eager to have pain relief. They were like, no, we'll just go off with the labs that you had done at 36 weeks. Blood count is fine, so we're gonna go ahead and okay you for the epidural. So once you get settled into your room, we'll have the anesthesiologist come in and give that to you. And I was like, great. So my nurse is like helping me walk down the hallway. She's like laboring with me in between contractions. I get in there. They're like, okay, go ahead and sit down on the bed. The anesthesiologist is here already, so we're gonna go ahead and do the epidural. The anesthesiologist and his team were super, super nice. And the student I think that they had in there was like 7 foot tall. So they had him come in and they went through the process with me, and I signed all the paperwork and everything. And they raised the bed up and had me like bend over so that they could access my back. And I remember they sat Elijah in front of me and we were like looking each other dead in the eye, and I was like, I'm really scared. Like, I don't know how this is gonna feel. I'm already in between contractions. I don't know like how it's gonna feel while I'm having a contraction. I'm afraid I'm gonna move and like paralyze myself or something. And so he and the nurse are like both at the computer, like really helping me breathe through the contractions, like try to get me to calm down a little bit. They gave me the epidural, which wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be, but it was definitely like, there was a point where they were threading the catheter that I was like, ooh, I really don't like the feeling of that. So they gave me a test dose. I started feeling a little bit of pain relief. I also think that they had given me a little bit of pain medicine through my IV when I got in there. I think they did, because I remember like my contractions kind of slowing down a little bit at that point, because I couldn't sit still at all. And so after I got the epidural administered, they laid me in the bed and got me all situated. And I think it was like around 10 o'clock at that point. So finally I'm having some pain relief, and I remember getting settled into the bed, and I'm like, okay, I can do this now. So I think they came in to check me at like 10:30 or 11 or so, and I was already at a 6. And so I was like, okay, I'm over halfway there. I feel good. I can definitely do this now with the epidural. The hardest part seems like it's over. All I have to do is get fully dilated and we can start pushing. At that time, my parents had come to the room and they were talking with me and stuff, and I was feeling really good. Wasn't feeling any pain whatsoever. We were kind of just playing the waiting game at that point. I mean, I was feeling good enough to I posted a TikTok for the main channel. So if you go back and look on September 15th, I did actually post a TikTok that day because I had them drafted to be posted while I was on maternity leave. My OB wasn't scheduled to be on call until 5:30 p.m. And at that point, with me being 60 centimeters dilated and 70% effaced, I honestly was kind of afraid that I would deliver before she got there. And that would have been really, really bad because the on-call OB wasn't covered by my insurance. She wasn't in network. So if she had delivered Laura, it would have been really bad. So my nurse popped in a couple of times and she was asking me if I'd like to be moved, like rotated to the left or to the right. And I was comfortable at that point, so I kind of declined. And looking back now, I really should have asked to be moved more often because I feel like that kind of slowed my labor down. And when I get to that point, you'll understand what I mean. But the nurse was super nice, and she just kind of was letting me just kind of guide the process, and she wasn't like pushing me to move or anything, which I feel like she should have done. It seemed like she was a little bit too timid to like tell me what I needed to do. And so she was like, oh, you're like one of my sweetest patients right now, like you're so easygoing and things like that, when like I should have been moving around a little bit more, even with the epidural. So the next time she came in, she was like, okay, I think you should like really move. So I decided to let her rotate me in the bed and kind of like get things moving. The nurse came in and she checked me again. And I think this was around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was expecting to like progress kind of fast because I had already progressed 2 centimeters like within the 2 hours that I was there in triage and then in getting my epidural and things like that. So I was expecting to be kind of far. So the nurse came in and she checked me and she was like, okay, I'm gonna kind of overestimate here. It seems like you're about a stretchy 8. Like I could stretch your cervix out with my fingers to an 8. So I think you're about an 8 right now. I was like, that's perfect. Things have slowed down since I got the epidural. But I was like, at least I'm not gonna deliver before my OB arrives. So an 8 is good. I'm almost there. I'm feeling really good. Seems like I'm gonna get this done really quickly. Right after my OB arrives, maybe I'll have the baby and then everything will go smoothly and we'll be done with this process. 5:45 rolls around. My OB finally comes in to check me, and she said, I think that the nurse was a little bit generous in her assessment of 8 centimeters. She's like, I actually think you're closer to a 7, which means that you haven't progressed in a couple of hours. You've been steadily at the same dilation. Nothing is happening. She said, so would you be okay with a little bit of Pitocin? I said, absolutely yes. I'm ready to have this baby. Anything that I need to do to kind of encourage my body along, I will do it. So she's like, that sounds perfect. I'm going to order some Pitocin and we're going to see how things progress from here. She went ahead and broke my water. And she said, we're going to give you just a little bit of time to see what your body does now that your water is broken and see if that kind of encourages labor along without having to give Pitocin. She said, but if I come back and check you and you're still at a 7, then we're going to go ahead and start Pitocin. So we were okay with that. At around 8 p.m., so they were checking me about every 3 hours. 8 p.m. comes around and I'm still at a 7. So at this point, I know I'm going to have Pitocin. My body is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. I have my water broken, everything like that. I'm still having contractions, but I'm not dilating. They went ahead and ordered Pitocin, but in the time that we were waiting for the Pitocin to arrive and to start the Pitocin drip, Laura started having some serious decelerations in her heart rate, and it was really kind of scary. With each contraction, her heart rate would decrease pretty dramatically. They immediately encouraged me to roll over to my left side, and the computer monitor was over here on my left side, and I remember all of us like sitting around watching the monitor waiting for her heart rate to come back up with each contraction, and the room was dead silent. And I remember thinking, this is it, I'm gonna have to have an emergency C-section. Like, I've made it to this point, I've been laboring this long, I've done all the things to have a natural birth, and I'm gonna have to have a C-section. But luckily her heart rate came back up, and it was in the normal range for long enough for them to be satisfied with that. So they went ahead and they were like, we're just gonna wait and let her kind of adjust a little bit and give her some time before we start Pitocin. During the time that we were kind of waiting for Alora's heart rate to stabilize, I was instructed obviously to lay on my left side to kind of help her a little bit with that. Because I was instructed to lay on my left side, my epidural began drifting over to my left side and it started wearing off on my right side. At that point, I had given myself maybe like 2 boosts of the epidural since I had gotten it, but I started giving myself more and more boost of epidural every time I was allowed to, and it just wasn't helping. So I asked for the anesthesiology team to come in and help me with the epidural before they started me on Pitocin, because I knew that once I started Pitocin, my contractions were going to get worse, and I really did not want to have to deal with that with my epidural failing on my right side. So the anesthesiologist came in and she gave me a bolus, and that did help me a little bit with the epidural on my right side, and I was allowed to kind of lay a little bit towards my right side. Alora's heart rate had stabilized at that point, and we were really just trying to get my epidural to even out so that I was feeling no pain across my entire body. That seemed to work. The nurses went ahead and started me on Pitocin, and immediately my body just started having like one consistent contraction. Like, my contractions on the monitor went from like obvious peaks, obvious valleys to like peak, 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 one continuous contraction. And luckily my bolus was helping at that point, so I wasn't really feeling much of it. But I was honestly kind of afraid what was going to happen once I got to the point where I was ready to push, because I really didn't want to have to be on Pitocin, but I really just wanted the whole labor and delivery process to be over at that point, because at the rate that I was dilating when I first arrived, we really thought that we were going to have a baby before dinner. And now it's like 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, and it's already the 16th and we have no baby. I honestly was feeling really discouraged at that point, and after the shock that I'd just been through with like thinking that I was going to have an emergency C-section, I was honestly just really afraid of what could happen next with the labor and delivery process. I honestly just wanted everything else to go smoothly and not have any more major interruptions or chaos or anything like that. I just wanted to deliver. And I hadn't had much sleep, and I was just really exhausted mentally and physically, and I was just ready to be done. They started Pitocin and they put the labor ball, the peanut ball, under my left leg, and they tried to get me in a position that was optimal for further dilation. And my back was absolutely killing me on my right side where my epidural was failing. I was having the most intense sciatic nerve pain that I've been having in a while. And I remember like my bolus was beginning to wear off on my right side again, and I remember just being in tears, like laying there. There was no position that was comfortable, and I knew I had to stay in that position to try to dilate further, so I was really just stuck, and there was nothing that I could do to like alleviate any of the pain, and I was kind of at my breaking point. So Elijah was like, okay, well, if you're crying, obviously the contractions are too painful for you, so let's have the anesthesiologist come back in and see what they can do. The anesthesiologist came in and they re-administered another bolus, and they checked me again, and I was 9.5 centimeters. So I had dilated from 7 to 9.5 within like an hour or so with the Pitocin. And so it seemed like that was what my body needed to kind of really kick it into high gear. They took the peanut ball out from underneath my leg, and they were like, okay, we're gonna let you rest for a little while you continue to fully dilate, and then we'll go from there. Between like midnight and 2 o'clock in the morning, I was actually able to sleep a little bit with the increased epidural. I had the second bolus. I wasn't feeling any pain. I was able to lay on my back, and we all just took a nap for like 2 hours, which was really, really nice to have before I started pushing, because I only had at that point 4 hours of sleep within like 48 hours. So I was exhausted. I'd gone through a lot. I was just ready to be done. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, the nurses come in. They tell me that I'm fully dilated, I'm ready to go. And so we decide to start pushing. We did a couple of practice pushes, I think at around 2:10 in the morning. They decide that the best course of action to try to get Alora to fully descend into my pelvis was to kind of push in like a rotation. So push for like 1 or 2 contractions on my left side, and then in the middle, and then on my right side, and just kind of keep rotating in between contractions so that I could get her to descend into my pelvis. So we did that, and at around 90 minutes or so into pushing, my epidural again for the third time began to wear off on my right side, and I was feeling all of the contractions, all of the pressure. My sciatic nerve pain was flaring up again, and I was just really struggling. And with the Pitocin, it's like one consistent contraction. It's not like you get a break in between the contractions and get a break in between pushing. It was just consistent pain, along with it was like dull pain and then intense pain during the pushing process. And so I wasn't getting a break. I was exhausted mentally and physically, and I really was like, I'm at my breaking point. I cannot do this anymore. Either you're gonna have to give me more epidural, or you're gonna have to send me in for a C-section, because I cannot do this anymore. Finally, at around 2 hours into pushing, the anesthesiologist comes back in, and I'm like, can I have one more bolus? I'm almost done. Like, we've been pushing for a while, and I cannot take the pain anymore. Like, I'm at my breaking point. And so she says, okay, I can only give you one more bolus. So we're gonna give one more bolus, and then you have to deliver. Like, we're done at this point. You can't have any more epidural. I'm like, okay, perfect. I know, like, this is like the push that I need. Like, I have to have this baby. So at this point, I've been pushing for over 2 hours. I finally got my last bolus of the epidural. My back and shoulders are absolutely in agony from like having to curl over my belly. I can't sit up anymore. Like, my IV was almost infiltrated because I was like pulling my knees so close to my chest trying to push. But I was making progress. My nurses were happy with that, and they were like, you're getting there, it's just slow going. I kept pushing. So around, I think I want to say like 5:25 or so, I got to the point where my nurses were calling my OB, and she was delivering another baby on like the floor below me, so she had to go up 3 floors to get to me. They were like having a discussion, like, while I was pushing, like, we might have to deliver this baby if she cannot get here in time. Like, she's on the verge of delivering. And so they were having a discussion, and they were like, I've delivered a baby before, like, I can do it. I'd rather not, but I can if it comes to that. Around 5:30, my OB barges through the door. At that point, I was like surrounded by people. A bunch of people came in the door. It's hectic. Things are happening. Everyone's gowning up. It's chaos. She finally gets gowned up. They get everything ready. They're like, okay, let's have a baby. So I start pushing, and within about 10 minutes, Elora was born. She was born at 5:40 in the morning on September 16th. And I had pushed for 3.5 hours. So if I had gone any longer, it probably would have been a C-section, but I was making progress, and it was just slow going. So they allowed me to continue to push. However, right before she was born, so I had gotten her head out, and the OB had noticed that she had the cord wrapped around her neck 3 times, which was contributing to her decelerations that she was having with each contraction, and why it was taking so long for her to descend. But Elijah did say that my OB was fantastic, and if he had not seen the cord wrapped around her neck when she came out, that he wouldn't have even noticed that it happened, because she was so quick to just put her finger right in between the cord and her neck and just unloop it so fast. He's like, it happened so fast, like it was barely even there for like half a second before she got it unraveled. And then because she'd had the cord wrapped around her neck, she came out really blue. My doctor was like, okay, you need to push and get the rest of her out right now. So that was when she was born. And they laid her on my chest, and she recovered pretty quickly. She started crying, I think, within like a minute. And her color came back really quickly. Actually, I was crying so much that I couldn't even look at her when she first came out, and so I didn't notice that she was such a dark shade of blue. Elijah did, and he was the one that told me. But she came out, and she was perfect, and she cried, and we were just like so emotional, and just kind of like allowing ourselves to kind of be blissfully unaware of what was happening at that point. I noticed that there's still like some chaos going on. My OB had pointed out that I had a slight tear, and so she was going to stitch me up. In between her saying that and the nurses getting the equipment necessary to stitch me up, I remember my OB reaching up and touching my belly. So she pressed on my belly a couple times, and she said, she's boggy. I knew what that meant. I knew that that meant I was actively hemorrhaging. I remember looking up at Elijah. We've been together so long that we can kind of communicate without saying anything. And so I knew that, like, by judging the look on his face, I could tell like how severe the situation really was. And so I kind of just looked at him. I remember staring at him for like a minute or so. It felt like forever, just like trying to gauge, like, from his facial expression how bad it was, because I couldn't see anything and I couldn't feel anything either from my epidural. I could feel like light touch, but I really couldn't feel much more than that. his face wasn't giving anything away. Like he was just observing. It didn't seem like he was freaking out or anything. And I think honestly, looking back, that was like to try to keep me calm. Like I think he was freaking out, but he wasn't trying to show it. And so I have Allura on my chest. I'm just kind of waiting like to see what's gonna happen. I wasn't feeling dizzy from the blood loss or anything. I was just anticipating feeling not so good from bleeding out. So I'm kind of waiting for things to happen and for my OB to tell me something, like tell me what's going on. And I remember looking up at Elijah and I was like, am I okay? Like, am I gonna die? Like, I know I'm hemorrhaging. I know that's what that means. He goes, no, like everything's fine. You're okay. And so at that point, I actually felt my OB reach her entire arm into me. She said that I had a bit of retained placenta, and so she had to manually remove it. So she reached her arm up into me and I felt her scrape the inside of my uterus to try to like separate that little piece of placenta from the inside of my uterus. And I distinctly remember like how that felt. It wasn't so much pain, it was more so like pressure and a really uncomfortable amount of pressure, like a huge amount of discomfort. But it didn't take long and she finally got the placenta out. She got the bleeding under control. They were like really pressing on my stomach and things like that. Elijah actually told me that she reached up inside me a few times and took her hand and went like this and just was getting handfuls of coagulated blood out of me and just dumping it in the trash can below me, just scraping, dump, scraping, dump, scraping, dump, just in a massive amount of blood. And I think that's what he was watching when I was kind of trying to gauge his reaction in terms of like how severe the situation was. And because he was like so shocked at the scene, he couldn't say anything or do anything, and he was just kind of just watching it happen. He actually told me afterwards that was the scariest moment of his life. And afterwards he said, I want more kids, but I don't want to put you through that again, and I never want to watch that happen again. He said that was the scariest thing that I've ever seen in my entire life. Her just reaching up into you time and time again and removing just globs and globs of blood. It was absolutely terrifying. After she was able to remove the placenta, she actually showed it to us, and that was really cool. So I still wasn't feeling any pain. I wasn't feeling dizzy. I wasn't feeling the effects of the blood loss or anything like that. And she showed me like where Allura was inside of the little sac around the placenta, and she showed me everything, and Elijah cut the cord, and it was kind of smooth going from there. She was able to stitch me up. I did have a small tear going upwards, if you can imagine how painful that was. So she stitched me up and they got things going, and because I had a little bit of blood loss, she decided to order some Pitocin to kind of help my uterus contract back down and kind of control the bleeding a little bit more. And so because she had ordered more Pitocin, she asked if I had wanted more pain relief, like IV pain medication. And at this point, this is kind of where things become a little bit fuzzy to me in my memory. I kind of have some gaps in my memory because I had just gone through that massive amount of blood loss, and I had not had much sleep, and I'd been awake for a long time going through the labor and delivery process. So I actually don't remember her asking me if I would like pain medication. That's something that Elijah told me afterwards. I didn't answer because I don't remember her asking me that. My OB looked at my nurse and said she'll want pain medicine. So they administered a little bit more pain medication to me. We had an hour of skin to skin with Allura.
She sounds a little funky, but this skin to skin and her crying like this is just what we need to work it out, okay?
And they picked her up and they weighed her and they measured her, and she came out at a whopping 8 pounds 10 ounces, which was about 4 ounces more than they had estimated at my last scan at my 40-week appointment. And she was 20 inches long, and she was perfect. She was perfectly healthy, no effects from having the cord wrapped around her throat so many times, nothing from the labor process. It was a long and grueling process, but we all came out okay. This is also where I have a little bit of gap in my memory. So they got me out of bed and they had put mesh underwear on me, and they took out my epidural, which taking out my epidural was actually like a non-issue. I was expecting it to be like a process and like uncomfortable. I don't remember feeling anything whatsoever. Like they got it out, taped me up, and I was fine. I don't remember them putting the mesh underwear on me at all. I just remember Elijah holding her, and they sat me down in the wheelchair and they gave Allura to me all swaddled up, and then we got rolled down to our recovery room. So this was like 7 o'clock in the morning. So I'd been there for 24 hours at that point. When I got up and was wheeled to the recovery room. When I stood up, I could feel my legs, but I couldn't feel the sides of my legs. So like the sides of my thighs, I could not feel. I actually remember getting wheeled into the recovery room, and Elijah and I just looked at each other and we were like, what do we do now? Like, we have a baby, we're here alone in the recovery room, like what now? We have a baby. But I remember being just so exhausted that I was almost delirious. And so I remember my parents had gone down to the cafeteria and got me breakfast, but I was not like hungry. I was really just exhausted and just tired. I hadn't eaten since before coming to the hospital the previous day. But I remember being just so exhausted and nauseous and in pain from the Pitocin that they'd ordered to like help my uterus contract and control the bleeding. I couldn't eat, and it was so much so that like I have an issue taking pills, so I have to take pills with food. I couldn't get a big enough bite to actually take the pills because I was so nauseous. Other than the IV pain medication that I had before, I didn't have anything. So I was just like feeling the pain and the contractions after the birth and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know what else to do. I guess I'm just gonna try to sleep. But before that, I had a nurse come in, and bless this nurse, because I was in probably the most vulnerable position that I'd ever been in my entire life. I was running on 4 hours of sleep in the past 48 hours. I just delivered. I just had a massive hemorrhage. New baby, first time mom. I wanted to breastfeed. I knew I wanted to breastfeed. So she came in and she like basically changed me and cleaned me up and was helping me walk around and stuff. And she let me know like how to take care of myself, like how to change all of my pads and stuff like that. How do I order food? What's gonna happen? When you need to feed her, and when the nurses are gonna come in and things like that. So she got me settled down back in the bed, and I decided to take a nap. So Elijah held Alora because we put her in the bassinet, and he was like, I feel like I can't sleep with her in the bassinet. Like, I don't know, I just don't feel safe putting her down. So he held her, I took a nap. I ended up napping for like, I think 3 or 4 hours. And during that time, Elijah's parents came in and they met Alora. When I got up, Elijah went down to the cafeteria and got me some food, and it was like the best food I'd had in my entire life. I think he got me Subway like multiple times because I wasn't allowed to have lunch meat unless it was warmed up. But after I delivered, I was like, I just want lunch meat. So he went down to the cafeteria and got me some Subway and a coffee. I asked the nurse to tape up my IV so I could take a shower. And that shower was like really hard to navigate with like everything that was happening and my IV still on my arm. But it felt good to finally take a shower after being in the hospital for like a whole day and a half. I think while I was in the shower, the nurses came and asked if they could give Alora her first bath. And I remember Elijah wanted to go with her, but he was afraid that I would need his help while I was in the shower. And so he stayed in the room and just sat there and waited for me to be done because he was afraid that I was going to be in the room by myself and need something. She came back from her bath, and then I got out of the shower, and then we had some food. My parents came back to visit again. I think I made the birth announcement that day, and we kind of just like practiced breastfeeding and things like that. I actually had called the lactation consultant in before I took a nap because I was trying to latch her, but she wasn't latching, and I was new to breastfeeding at the time, so I didn't know what I was doing. Right before she got there, I got her to latch, so she just kind of observed and she gave me some tips and stuff, and she congratulated me and she encouraged me that I was doing a great job. And then she left, and then I just continued trying to feed Alora during that time. That night, I had tried to feed Alora again, and she would not latch. I tried both sides. I tried for a very long time, so I ended up calling the nurse in. She said, well, if you can't get her to latch, why don't you try to hand express about 20 drops of colostrum, and we'll give that to her. And then that will be her feed, and then afterwards, we'll just try and get her to latch again. I really wanted to breastfeed, but I wasn't necessarily against formula in any way. Like, if she was going to need formula, I was 100% happy to give her whatever she needed. I just really wanted to give myself time to try and breastfeed. At the next feed, I was able to latch her for a short time, so I was happy with that. Elijah laid down and went to sleep, and I fed Alora again, and at that time, I was able to feed her, change her, and re-swaddle her and put her back in the bassinet without her getting upset or crying at all. And I remember like stepping back from the bassinet, and I was like, I can't believe I did that. I feel so proud of myself. I was able to do all of that while Elijah wasn't sleeping, and I'm not wake either one of them up. And I was really proud of myself. So I went to the bathroom, came back, and I decided to lay down and try to get some sleep myself. But shortly after I laid down, Alora woke up, and we could not for the life of us get her to settle back down. She was crying like she was in pain. I tried to feed her, and nothing was getting her to stop crying. So we called for the nurses to come in, and we thought maybe it was because she hadn't taken a bowel movement since she was born. We asked them if they could take her and try to get her to have a bowel movement. So they took her up to the nursery. They brought her back within like 15 minutes or so. They got her to go to the bathroom. They re-swaddled her. She was asleep. And so we were like, perfect. We put her in the bassinet and we went to sleep. I had set an alarm on my phone for Alora's next feed. The nurse gave me a window of time, like between this hour and this hour, you need to get up and make sure she eats. And so I set an alarm for the earlier hour of that time window, and I tried to get her to feed, and she wouldn't wake up. I couldn't get her to wake up enough to eat. So I was like, okay, well, maybe she's just not ready right now. I'll give her another hour in that time window, and then I'll get up and I'll feed her. So I set another alarm, and then by the time that one went off, I was like, okay, she needs to eat. This is like the end of that window, she needs to eat. So at that point, I sit up in the bed, I'm waking myself up, I get her out of the bassinet, I start like messing with her, I start unswaddling her, I start playing with her feet. I'm kind of just admiring her and just kind of like having that moment with her, trying to wake her up a little bit to prepare her to latch. And at that point, the on-call pediatrician for the day bursts through the door, and she walks over to me and she goes, when was the last time she ate? And I told her, and I said, I'm trying to wake her up right now to try to get her to eat. It's within that time period that they told me last night she needed to eat. And so she snatched her away from me and she said, okay, we need to do a blood sugar check on her right now. And so I'm like, okay. I'm kind of like shocked at the like aggression and like the urgency in her voice, because I'm just like new mom bliss, just admiring my newborn and trying to feed her and stuff. And like, I didn't realize that there was anything wrong. And so they went ahead and did a heel stick on her, and they took her blood sugar, and it was dangerously low. It was like 20 something. And so they were like, are you sure? Test it again. And they tested it again, and it was still in the 20s. So they were like, okay, we need to take her up to the nursery right now and give her the glucose gel so that we can raise her blood pressure so that she can eat. They took her to the nursery, and I remember like the hormones and the mom guilt just like consuming me at that point, because I hadn't had much sleep. And I just delivered a baby, and I felt like I had done something wrong, and I didn't know like what I did. And I felt like the pediatrician was kind of scolding me, like, I cannot believe you haven't fed her yet. And I was like, I am trying. I'm actually trying to wake her up to feed her. I've unswaddled her. I'm trying to undress her. I'm trying to pinch her feet. I'm rubbing her cheek. I'm trying to get her to latch. Like, I'm doing everything that I know to do in the moment. And I really felt like I'd done something wrong, and that like they were going to think that I was a terrible mom and that I was just not feeding her and neglecting her. I'm sitting there like crying, like I just want them to bring her back. I don't know why she won't latch. I don't know what I'm doing wrong and everything like that. And Elijah's really trying to encourage me. He's like, you've not done anything wrong. Like, you didn't know that her blood sugar was that low. You were trying to do everything that you were told to do. And so they brought her back, and she was much better. I was able to latch her. And then at that point, we kind of made a plan. So they had given her a little bit of formula to try to really raise her blood sugar. And they were like, are you okay with formula? Like, are you against it in any way? Like, are you just dead set on breastfeeding? Like, what's your plan? I personally don't mind to give her whatever she needs. I wanted to give myself enough time to know, like, to just really try to breastfeed. So she was like, okay, so why don't we do this? She's like, you have to stay another night. You're staying another night. We have to do the blood sugar protocol, which means she has to pass another 3 blood sugar tests within the next like day. So we're going to come in and stick her heel again 3 more times and check her blood sugar, offer her breast milk first, and then after she latches or doesn't latch, we're going to go ahead and supplement with formula. So that's what we did. So the next day we had to stay another night. So it was the 17th at this point. And so we kind of went through the entire day, like giving her mostly formula. Elijah's brother and his wife and their kids came to visit. She was actually still pregnant with their second at this point. My parents came back to visit. Coben came to visit. We all kind of had the afternoon to chat with each other. Alora did latch again for a good amount of time, and then we supplemented with formula afterwards, and she was doing much better. She passed all 3 of her blood sugar tests. And so we decided that that night we were going to try to get a little bit of sleep, and we were going to go ahead and send her to the nursery and just let them feed her with formula so that we could get a couple hours of sleep, because we knew at that point we were going to have to go home and it was all going to be on us. And I remember asking, the second night that we stayed in the hospital, the overnight nurse came in and she brought in a bunch of formula and bottles and nipples and things like that for us to take home. And we were just chatting with this nurse, and she was one of the sweetest nurses. Like, she brought in all this stuff for us to take home, and she was just really encouraging us. And I remember asking her, like, I still can't feel the sides of my legs. Like, is that something that will go away with time, or will it eventually get better? Because since the epidural, I can't feel anything. Right after birth, it was really painful. So I was having like shooting nerve pain. Like, every single time I would try to get into bed or like lift my leg up or lift it this way, I just had this shooting nerve pain all the way down to my knee, and it was extremely uncomfortable. I couldn't do anything except for sit straight down. I could barely lift my leg to get into bed. It hurt so bad, both of them. So much so that like I could barely like get up and walk. And she was like, oh yeah, once you get up and start moving around a little bit more, it'll get better and you'll get more feeling. She's like, not to say that you need to be moving around or you've not been moving enough. She's like, you just had a baby, like you can relax, but the more you go about your daily life and move around, it should get better. That morning they brought her back, they brought me breakfast. I had actually been discharged at that point because, so they kept coming in every few hours and pressing on my belly and like checking everything. And I really just did not want to be a patient anymore. My mom had brought me my own bottle of Motrin, and because once I was discharged, they couldn't give me anything else. So they discharged me, they took my IV out, and they didn't have to come in anymore and press on my belly or anything like that. So I was able to just self-administer over-the-counter pain medicine, and Elora was the only one that was still admitted to the hospital at that point. The next morning came around, and they brought her back, and she was perfectly fine. And we were able to eat breakfast and get ready for the day, and then we were able to be discharged from the hospital. They asked me if I wanted to walk out of the hospital when I was discharged. Like I still can't feel my legs, like it hurts really bad. So they had to wheel me out. I think we left at, I want to say it was like noon or 1 o'clock on the afternoon of the 18th, and we were able to come home. I did talk a little bit about this in my 3-week postpartum video that's on my channel. I really wanted to breastfeed, and I was really upset that we had gone through this whole low blood sugar thing with her, and that had kind of like disrupted my breastfeeding process. I kind of just was pumping every 3 or 4 hours, and we were just giving her formula because it seemed like that was the only thing she tolerated was formula. Every time I give her breast milk, she'd get really gassy and really uncomfortable, and you have to give her gas drops and things like that. So I was just pumping and storing the milk and just trying to keep my milk supply up for her in case we did eventually start to breastfeed. I think my milk finally came in around like day 4 or 5. And at that point, I actually was pumping quite a bit of milk, but I didn't actually try and latch her until she was like 2 or 2.5 weeks old. And so since then, I just had a day where I was just like, I'm going to latch her, try to latch her before every single feed. And if she doesn't latch, then we're going to do formula. And I was mixing like breast milk with her formula and stuff like that, and colostrum with her formula. At the 2.5 week mark, we officially started exclusively breastfeeding, and she has been exclusively breastfed since then. She refused to take a bottle after that point. She's not taken a bottle since she was maybe 2 months old. So we are almost at the 1 year mark of exclusively breastfeeding, which was my original goal. And so I'm really proud that we have finally made it to that point and made it to my goal of breastfeeding for 1 year. I'll go beyond a year because I don't think she's ready to wean, and I'll kind of just, I guess, let her decide when she's done breastfeeding. But I'm really proud of both of us for continuing through that journey and not giving up, even with the low blood sugar and the formula and everything else that we had to do when she was first born. But I will say there are some lingering effects from labor and delivery for me because I had the epidural. I had been giving so many boluses of epidural, and I had been forced to lay on my left side for so long to kind of stabilize Elora's heart rate. Now, this is not like to demonize the epidural in any way, because I was feeling numbness in the sides of my legs towards the end of my pregnancy. So if I were to lay in bed on one side or the other too long, I would get numbness in my thighs. But once I got up or changed positions, or, you know, the longer that I went about the day walking, it would go away and I would regain feeling. But I think because I couldn't feel my legs in the bed, I couldn't feel that they were going numb, and I couldn't move because I was restricted to my left side for Elora's sake. It really killed the nerves on the left side of my thigh. I still wasn't regaining any feeling, and when I came home, I couldn't get into bed without like laying all the way down first and kind of rolling into the bed because I couldn't lift my legs up without feeling that horrendous like lightning nerve pain all the way down both legs. When I went to my first postpartum appointment, I think I was about 4 weeks postpartum or so, and I asked him, I was like, I'm still having like a lot of numbness and some nerve pain. The nerve pain had gotten better at that point, but I was still numb in both legs. And I was like, I'm still having numbness in both legs. Like, is that something that will go away with time? And she was like, yeah, as long as it's getting better, I'm encouraged by that. You know, check in on things and we'll see how it progresses. So I'm here to tell you that it's been almost a year and I still cannot properly feel the left side of my left leg. I still have numbness to this day. I still have a weird sensation of nerve pain in my knee, the side of my left knee. It's the worst when I'm shaving. So like I can feel pressure, but I can't really feel a tactile sensation, and I can feel like a bundle of nerves like in my left leg that doesn't feel right. I did regain full feeling in my right leg, but I still can't feel the left side of my left leg just from where I was in that position for so long for Alora's sake. And so when I shave, that tactile sensation really triggers the nerves, and it just, the grazing feeling just triggers that numb tingling sensation all down the side of my thigh, and it's really uncomfortable. It's a sensation that I really don't enjoy, and it's really overstimulating for me, and it's something that has really made me reconsider what my next labor and delivery process will look like, because it really scares me knowing that we want to have another baby and not knowing if it's really gonna make it worse the next time that I have an epidural or that I have a labor and delivery process. Who knows? Is it gonna get worse? Is it gonna get better? Yeah, it's really scared me, and I've really had to come to terms with the fact that I might never regain proper sensation in my left leg from that. It's something that I've really had to come to terms with. It might never get better. It might always feel like this for the rest of my life, and it actually might get worse with the next labor and delivery process. I have no way of knowing. That's not to say that I wouldn't get another epidural, because I don't think that I would have made it through the labor and delivery process without the epidural. But it's really made me reconsider our timeline for another baby. Do I want another baby? Do I want another epidural? Would I rather just opt for a C-section and just get the spinal and not have to be on my, confined to my left side for so long? I really don't know. It's just something that I'm going to have to talk with my next OB team about, because my OB has moved to another state, so I won't be able to have her deliver my next baby. Yeah, it's really made us reconsider our family planning and the timeline for having another baby, because it honestly terrifies me that it might get worse. I don't foresee it getting any better at this point. It's been almost a year, and I'm still just, it's gotten better to this point, and it's not gotten any better from here. So yeah, that's where we're at. Unfortunate enough, I have to leave it on that negative point, because that's the end of the story. However, I have a beautiful, healthy daughter, and that's really all that I could ask for. I knew going into this that there might be some long-term effects from labor and delivery and long-term effects from pregnancy. And if this is the worst that I walked away from, then so be it. I've kind of come to terms with it. I can still walk. I can still feel the majority of my leg. It's just kind of uncomfortable. I don't have full tactile sensation on the left side of my thigh. That's it. If you guys made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry that it was a little bit gory and a little bit, of a downer on the end of the story. But yeah, that's my birth story. I'm so glad that I finally filmed it. Thank you guys so much for being patient with me. I don't have the best sleeper. I don't have the best napper. Every nap she takes is a contact nap, and I'm hoping to remedy that at some point soon. But with the nursing and everything, she's very much so a contact napper, contact sleeper. So thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you want to hang around for any more of my lifestyle videos, daily vlogs that I do here on this channel. Also be sure to check out the other channels that I edit for, Everything Autos and Everything Autos Garage. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!